A lot happened in week 6 that's going to change fantasy football for the next few weeks or the whole season. Because you had a lot of injuries to quarterbacks and, oh yeah, the best player in fantasy football, Christian McCaffrey. So this is everything you need to know heading into week 7 when you're looking at the waiver wire. Let's get into it. And we'll start with that situation with Christian McCaffrey because, yes, it's going to make his backups like Elijah Mitchell, who's available in 74% of leagues, look a lot more appealing now. The injury that McCaffrey suffered was an oblique injury, and he was able to return to the game but then left immediately again the next play. In the early reports from some of my trusted sources on Twitter, like Sports MD Analysis here, says the average oblique injury is a 1 to 2 week recovery time. It doesn't really impact performance all that much, but the severity can vary. And this means Elijah Mitchell could be the next man up. Now, Mitchell himself missed the past 2 games with injury, but if you were to look at his snap shares before that, he was the primary backup here. In week 1, he played 15% of the snaps. In week 3, he played 36% of the snaps. Then he was injured for week 4 and 5. You might say, what happened in week 2? Well, Christian McCaffrey played 100% of the snaps that week. And now in this past game in week 6, this is what the snap shares look like. McCaffrey was playing his majority of the snaps, 36. He gets injured. It was Jordan Mason who sees 15, Elijah Mitchell who sees 7. So now there's some question marks on, is Jordan Mason going to be the guy, because he played more snaps when McCaffrey went down than Elijah Mitchell. But there's a chance that Elijah Mitchell heading into this game was not 100% and was going to be limited either way, and they weren't expecting McCaffrey to miss the game. Because I want to trust a bigger sample of what Kyle Shanahan has done with Elijah Mitchell as his running back. This is what Elijah Mitchell did as a 6th round rookie. In the same draft where they took a 3rd round Tyrion Davis-Price, you see 1,100 total yards here. He had in 11 games over 17 carries and had 100 plus yards in 5 games. And before McCaffrey came to this team, Elijah Mitchell held the highest opportunity share ever for a 49ers running back under Kyle Shanahan. And now heading into the next game, you're going to have a big game on Monday Night Football. The 49ers coming off a loss, the Vikings coming off of a win, the Vikings at home. I think they're going to trust Elijah Mitchell more in this one, but that's just what I'm leaning on right now. He gets the edge in terms of where my waiver priority goes. But there's no doubt about it, and you can probably guess who the next guy we're going to talk about is. It's the other guy in that backfield, Jordan Mason. Because Mason is basically unowned right now, so maybe Elijah Mitchell is not available in your league. Maybe you're one of those 25% of leagues where people already have him and they're smart and they watched our videos this offseason because he's the #1 handcuff. But Jordan Mason right now is somebody you need to pick up because of what he did this past week. And what he did was outsnap Elijah Mitchell 15-2. And we're going to guess that it's because Mitchell was banged up and not ready for a full workload in this game, but still, that's a wide spread. Now, this didn't lead to too much action for Mason in this game as the 49ers were trailing at times. It was a brutal matchup on the road against the Browns, but he did find the end zone, 5 carries, 27 yards. He remained efficient, over 5 yards per touch. This is something to at least note. The background on Mason is that he was an undrafted free agent last year and he had a really good camp in preseason, so he made the initial 53-man roster. But when you look at what he did before that, he wasn't great in college. He didn't have any great testing metrics at the combine, slightly above average speed, slightly above average strength with the bench press. Everything else was below average. So he doesn't really profile out as a true NFL running back, but he does have the size. And that size is 5'11", 223 pounds, so he can work as a goal line, a red zone back. But here's the more interesting note. Since the beginning of 2022, Jordan Mason ranks #1 amongst all running backs in PFF grades. Now, of course, this is a much smaller sample than some of the other names on this list, like Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard, McCaffrey, but this is something to point out. Obviously, the run scheme helps because look at the other running backs on this list. McCaffrey we talked about, and oh yeah, Elijah Mitchell. These 49ers running backs are efficient. So heading into next week, if McCaffrey does miss, there's a decent chance that Jordan Mason's going to see minimum 30 to 40% of the snaps in this game, and there's a chance he even sees more than that. So add Jordan Mason and this rookie wide receiver in Kansas City, that is Rashod Rice, available in over 60% of leagues right now. Week in and week out, Rice continues to be one of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL. He's averaging 2.66 yards per out run. That's 14th amongst all receivers, but when you factor out some guys with a lot smaller samples, maybe they've only ran like 10 routes and had 2 catches and it's skewing their sample, well, Rice is actually top 8 amongst receivers then. And his production and efficiency continued in week 6 on Thursday Night Football. In a great matchup against the Broncos, Rice goes out there, he catches all 4 of his targets for 72 yards. He has a big play in this game, so this production is nice. Yet again, another double-digit fantasy performance. He had 13 points last week, but the underlying usage is even more encouraging. Because for the entire season, Rice has been like 5th or 6th on the team in snaps and routes run. He's been well behind Sky Moore, but look at this past week. He played just 3 less snaps than Sky Moore, ran just 1 less route than Sky Moore, and was used ahead of Kadarius Toney pretty clearly. And the more important note here as to why he saw some more usage outside of his own success the past few weeks is that a starting wide receiver, a guy who's performed as a starting wide receiver since the beginning of last year, and Justin Watson dislocated his elbow in this game. He's going to miss a few weeks at minimum, which gave Rashod Rice more opportunities and will give him more opportunities in the future. So you already have Rashod Rice carving out a meaningful role in the offense, and now Justin Watson is going to miss some time. Prioritize Rashod Rice out of the wide receivers on your waiver wire. And hey, 67% of people who watch these videos are not subscribed. And if you're one of them, just take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button. It helps me out and allows you to see my future content uploads. Now, the next wide receiver up is Curtis Samuel. I prefer Rashod Rashod Rice, but Curtis Samuel's maybe more available in your league. He's available in over 70% of leagues right now, but he's been great for the past month of the season. Over the past 3 weeks, Curtis Samuel has had at least 14 or more fantasy points and a touchdown in each game. He came into this game playing about 69% of the snaps. After this game, it's now well over 70% of the snaps, and this is important because his offense ranks #1 in the NFL in pass rate over expected, ahead of the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Vikings. Now, what does this mean? Well, this number right here, 8.3% in the top corner right here, that means that in neutral situations, in situations where we expect the Commanders to pass the ball, they're passing 8% more, meaning in run situations, they're still passing at a higher clip. Yes, this is very advantageous that he's out there in the #1 pass rate offense 70% of the time. And that all translated to yet again him scoring 14 fantasy points. He catches all 4 of his targets. He gets a rush attempt, something that he's been getting basically every single week, finds the end zone again for 14.2 points. Before this, he had back-to-back 18-point days. He's been very strong, a flex option, a starting receiver option in your lineups. So this speedster out of Ohio State lines up in the slot a lot, the 6th most in the league, and that's going to help when you have a younger quarterback in Sam Howell. They lean on slot receivers. And this upcoming schedule is pretty solid for him. You have the Giants, you have an Eagles, very beatable secondary. You can beat the Eagles secondary. Zach Wilson just did it this past weekend with Garrett Wilson at times. Patriots, you can beat them. You scroll down more, definitely the Seahawks, the Giants again. This is a really good matchup for Curtis Samuel the next month to 5 weeks of the year. So add Samuel and this basically rookie receiver, but he's in his second year. And that's the Lions' second-year receiver out of Alabama, former first-round pick, Jameson Williams, who's available in over 65% of leagues, and the 22-year-old flashed a very strong game in week 6. And now, although the volume wasn't all that high, you saw the highlight play from Jameson Williams. He had a highlight deep touchdown last year, called back by a penalty. This year, it's not called back. A 45-yard touchdown, ends the day with 2 catches, 53 yards, over 13 fantasy points, very viable for your starting lineups. Now, if you don't know who Jameson Williams is, he was one of the most prolific wide receivers in the 2022 wide receiver class. And the reason for that is right here. He had over 1,500 yards at Alabama in the SEC against the hardest defenses. He puts up 15 touchdowns in this season after transferring from Ohio State on 118 targets. But then he tore his ACL and he basically missed his whole rookie year and was limited because of that and got suspended for gambling to start this season. So it's been a very rocky road for this wide receiver, but no matter where his game is at, he has the explosive upside, and we saw that this past week. Now, the interesting thing this past week was that we saw less overall usage from Jameson Williams, just 16 snaps. This is less than last week, but a couple of things changed. Amon-Ra St. Brown returned to the starting lineup this week, and also the Lions were basically up by a touchdown to 2 touchdowns the entire game, so they didn't have to throw the ball, especially deep, all that much. So there's a chance the game script is what limited him this past week. I still think he's going to be ahead of the 33-year-old Marvin Jones in the depth chart or on the depth chart in future weeks. He's somebody that you need to stash in most leagues. And somebody that we've been telling you now for like a month straight to be stashing, but is still available in over 60% of leagues, is Taj Spears from the Tennessee Titans. This guy is literally a top 3 handcuff in fantasy. Why is he on your waiver wire? Because this metric alone should get him there. Taj Spears has now played over 50% of the Titans snaps in 5 out of 6 games. And for the second straight week, he flashed some major upside. Now, overall, it doesn't look great. 4 carries, 15 yards in a tough spot against Baltimore in London as well. But this, the 48-yard catch late, should have set them up to potentially tie and win the game later on. That 48-yard reception, second straight big play he's had in 2 straight games. So you're getting Spears to carve out a significant role in an offense that doesn't have a lot of upside, but he's explosive. And to this point in the season, he's top 10 in overall targets, and he has 4 more targets in 4 out of 6 games. That's very strong for a rookie running back. And of course, the main appeal here is what happens if Derrick Henry, an older running back with a lot of tread on his tires, was to miss a game or 2 or even a lot of time. Well, Taj Spears immediately becomes a 70 to 80% snap guy because they're already showing you they trust him a ton to play him 55% of the snaps in the majority of games this year. There's only a few running backs who have the type of ceiling that Tajay has. If the main guy in front of them goes down, he needs to be on your rosters. Now, a total flip in terms of running backs is Kareem Hunt, and that's because he's not as explosive now as a 28-year-old back, but he's available in 73% of leagues, and he's seeing a lot more usage in the Browns offense. So the Browns signed him in week 3 after the gruesome injury to Nick Chubb that ended his season in week 2. Quick recovery for Nick Chubb, but look at this. He plays 14 and 15 total snaps. Nothing crazy. He's the clear backup to Jerome Ford here, but that kind of changed this past week because this past week you see 28 snaps, by far a season high for Kareem Hunt, just 10 less than Jerome Ford. He's taking away snaps and he's taking away clear opportunities from Jerome Ford. Hunt was the more productive back this past week. He saw 15 total touches, over 70 total yards, finds the end zone, and he was clearly more efficient than Jerome Ford has been in the past 2 weeks or in week 6 alone, and this was against a really tough, probably the toughest matchup you can find in the San Francisco 49ers. He clearly cut into Jerome Ford's role, and he did it in 3 key ways. He started the game, he saw significant short yardage usage, and he played 28 snaps to Ford's 38. So this is concerning as Hunt saw nearly 50% of the opportunities and was efficient in this game. Bad news for Jerome Ford. And the matchups these next few weeks for the Browns aren't anything crazy. Against the Cardinals, a great matchup. The Seahawks have been a good run defense but beatable, and the Colts an average run defense. This is good news for Kareem Hunt if he can keep up the efficiency. And you kind of expect him to keep up this efficiency because running backs behind this offensive line should be good. Jerome Ford hasn't been all that great, but the Browns have a top 5 run blocking unit. Their run scheme is fantastic, so this is all great news for a guy who's available in nearly 80% of leagues in Kareem Hunt. So it's better to be early on Kareem Hunt if he potentially takes over this backfield as a guy who's been in this system now for 5 years. So add Hunt and this next rookie RB. And by the way, at the end of the video, we're going to go through a huge list of potential waiver adds just in case some of these guys or most of them are not available in your league yet. Now that rookie running back is Roshan Johnson, who despite Khalil Herbert getting injured last week, well, Roshan's still available in over 60% of leagues, and a big reason for that was he missed this past game with a concussion. Now Deontay Foreman did get the start, and he wasn't awful, but he was by no means dynamic, which is something that Roshan Johnson can bring to the table as a younger, more explosive back. Now Roshan was Bijan's backup at Texas, but if you look at his overall yardage and receptions during his time in college, he totaled nearly 2,200 total yards and 56 catches, which is great for most running backs who are just the primary guys in their backfield. Now in the games where Khalil Herbert was healthy, Roshan was still averaging 6 carries and 4 targets, so 10 opportunities per game as sort of the sidekick to Herbert. And it was thought that this would be a 3-headed backfield when we were in camp. They signed Deontay Foreman. They ended up still having Khalil Herbert when Montgomery goes, but then they draft Roshan Johnson. But what we ended up seeing was all during camp in the preseason, Roshan was the guy standing out the most for his pass protection and pass catching. He passed Deontay Foreman, and he clearly pushed Khalil Herbert with those 10 opportunities per game for a significant role in the offense. Now, the reason why I mentioned that is he already beat Deontay Foreman out all of the preseason in camp, and he has the draft capital over him, which probably weighs more to this staff than the cheap contract Foreman got. So I think Roshan's going right in front of Foreman once he returns this week. Now, all this is important because the matchups are great for Roshan the next month. You get bottom 10 run defenses in the Raiders, Chargers, and Panthers, and the Panthers and Chargers are bottom 5 in defending the run. So go get Roshan Johnson if he's available on your waivers and get this next asset. And that is the fantasy blueprint that now 4,000 people are using weekly to win their matchups, make their playoffs, and take home a fantasy championship. Every day of the week, I'm sending you these tools with updates throughout the week. The waiver wire tools, those will go out right now after this video. The key stats database, rest of season rankings, projections and rankings, and the game-by-game matchup notes. Very, very important. Here's an example of the game-by-game notes from previous weeks. You can look at it by the game-by-game, or you can look at it by the position. This is what you would get. Every single fantasy relevant player, some statistics about themselves for that year, their matchup advantage, if it's rushing, the offensive versus defensive line, what the overall matchup looks like, if it's cornerback, wide receivers, if it's quarterback against defensive line, all of this stuff and more. This is just one small piece of the puzzle in the fantasy blueprint. And the blueprint is extremely easy to get. I mean, 4,000 people have already acquired it. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And then you'll just follow these 2 simple steps right here. And here's the deal. It's $5 for the entire year, but the beautiful catch for you, if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, this is risk-free. You get your $5 right back. No questions asked. I don't care if you had the best player on your team gets hurt for the rest of the season. You get the $5 back. This is risk-free. You might as well use the material while you can. So to get access to your fantasy blueprint today and join the 4,000 other people with access right now, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. Let's discuss another rookie, and this time we go back to the wide receiver position for Josh Downs, who is still available in over 70% of leagues, despite us talking about him now for a few weeks of the season. Downs is the Colts' 3rd-round rookie out of UNC who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons despite having 2 separate different quarterbacks. Both, though, were good quarterbacks. And I mean, this is what he did in college. He had a 34% target share. You see this 97th? That's 97th percentile, meaning top 3% of all time in college, earning 34% of your team's targets. If you earn 25%, that's good. 30% is elite. 34% is historically good. And he profiled out in the draft as one of the best slot receivers that we've seen in quite some time, and that's exactly what he's been so far this season, a really solid slot receiver relative to all rookies that come out. His production and ability to earn targets continued yet again in week 6 with Gardner Minshew as his quarterback. He earned 8 targets. He finds the end zone, 13 more fantasy points, bada bing, bada bang. He's now ran 80% of the routes in 4 straight games. He's kind of taking the job away from Alec Pierce in terms of a volume and even usage standpoint now. And he's getting open against man coverage, which for rookies is really difficult. If you could sit down in a zone, that shows that you have experience and you're solid at earning targets. If you're doing it against man coverage cornerbacks as an undersized rookie like Josh Downs, that's elite. Believe it or not, the Colts, when Gardner Minshew is the quarterback, are running an extremely fast offense. This is number 2 in no huddle rate and 4th in overall plays per second ran. So they're getting a lot of plays off, which is obviously just going to help everybody on the team. That's why you're seeing Josh Downs run 45 routes this past week. So when he gets 8 targets, yeah, it's kind of easy to do that when you're running so many routes. All of this is fantastic for his fantasy value. Anthony Richardson might be considering season-ending shoulder surgery, which means that Gardner Minshew will be the starting quarterback. And that just leads to more pass attempts and less rush attempts from your quarterback in Gardner Minshew, who has a nice connection right now with Josh Downs. Add. Now for the second straight week, I want to tell you to add Janu Smith because he's available in 86% of fantasy leagues despite now having a 3rd straight performance of a strong game. And that strong game in week 6 ended up being against Washington, where he catches 4 of 5 targets, 36 yards, finds the end zone, 13.5 fantasy points. He's being used great in this offense. Now, just how good is great? Well, look at this right here. Kyle Pitts, the first number you're seeing is the snaps. The second number is the routes run. He's basically seeing the same role as Kyle Pitts here. 46 snaps for Kyle Pitts, 45 for Janu, 34 routes for Kyle Pitts, 33 for Janu. These guys are out there running all of the plays basically right now in this offense. And Janu continues to be a top 5, actually top 3 efficiency tight end, averaging 2.22 yards per route run. This is the top tier of tight ends if he was to continue this for the rest of the season, and that's why he's producing. This correlates strongly with success. As we mentioned last week, he just wasn't used properly in his previous offenses in Tennessee and New England as sort of just like a run blocker only. He's a great athlete who can catch, and now we're seeing that. The Falcons are utilizing both of their tight ends in this heavy 12 personnel. That's 2 tight end set offenses. It's leading to a lot of routes for both of them. It's leading to a lot of production recently for both of them. I expect this to continue as Desmond Ridder is trusting these guys. So add Janu Smith and monitor this next situation. And that'll be in Detroit for Craig Reynolds, because this past week we saw David Montgomery get banged up and not return to the game. And we can turn to Jeff Mueller, another Twitter doctor that I trust. You can see here, he says the bad news, David Montgomery was out for the rest of week 6, but the good news, he does not fracture his ribs. That's good. The return to play is going to be dependent on pain. Point number 2. Point number 3 is that the average time you miss here is about 2 weeks, which would mean that you're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs and Craig Reynolds in week 7. Now heading into this week, the Lions were already down running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs didn't play and Zonovan Knight didn't play as he's out for the season, another depth back that they have. This allowed Craig Reynolds to see the workload once Montgomery left. He sees 12 total touches, 43 total yards, nothing crazy in terms of production here. But he did play 43 snaps and he was like the only other guy out there because all the other backs on this team were injured. If you're not familiar, he went to a Division II school in Kutztown. During his time at Kutztown, he was productive, but doesn't really translate all that much to future NFL success. However, he is now running behind a top 5 offensive line with the Detroit line, so that's going to help if he starts to see some workload. And if you're dealing with some bye week issues heading into this week, he's a running back that you want if Montgomery does indeed miss. And here's the thing, Jahmyr Gibbs, yes, if we see that Montgomery out, Jahmyr Gibbs saw a big workload earlier this year and Craig Reynolds wasn't used that much with Montgomery out, but Jahmyr Gibbs this past week dealing with a hamstring injury. Look at this, did not practice Wednesday, did not practice Thursday, did not practice, that's the DMP Friday. He didn't practice all week dealing with a hamstring. It's usually a 3 to 4 week recovery. This has now been the 2nd week of the injury. We might not see Gibbs next week, which means it's a full backfield for Reynolds. So he's worth an add if you're in a waiver bind, and this next running back's available in 73% of leagues. And that's Devin Singletary, who, yes, I know you might be saying, oh, that's Dameon Pierce's backfield. We don't want this handcuff in Singletary. No, a lot changed this past week because Singletary led the Texans backfield in snaps, routes run, and running back opportunities ahead of Dameon Pierce, and Pierce didn't get injured. They just gave more of the workload to Singletary. Now, this led to a good game for him. On 13 touches, he sees 62 yards, so he was somewhat efficient in this game, solidly efficient against a tough New Orleans defense. But the biggest indicator to why we kind of want to add Singletary and see where this goes is how they used him late in the game. Singletary played 9 of the 13 snaps in the 4th quarter compared to just 2 for Dameon Pierce. And he was much more efficient, averaging 4.8 yards per touch compared to just 2.6 for Pierce. Singletary becomes a priority pickup heading into next week. Now I want to talk through a list of other guys to add in some of your leagues. If you're in smaller leagues, some more priorities. If you're in deeper leagues, some other guys to mention. Now Chuba Hubbard, he's not available in many leagues, just 36%. But if you're in a smaller league, he's somebody you need to add because Miles Sanders might miss some other times. And with Sanders out this past week, Hubbard dominated, 19 touches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. There's also Dalton Schultz, who's available in nearly 50% of leagues. His 3rd straight good week. He's a guy that you can try and pick up and add into like a trade because I don't think this is going to continue, but his 3rd straight good week for the Houston Texans. He ends up finding the end zone, 7 targets this week. 2 out of his past 3 weeks, he's seen solid volume. This was good to see, but to mention, Tank Dell was out in this game. A fantasy streamer option for you is Gardner Minshew. He's in an offense that is led by a really good offensive coordinator in Shane Steichen right now, and Anthony Richardson might miss the rest of the season. Now, outside of Jordan Mason, another guy who's probably unowned in your league is the rookie tight end Michael Mayer, who really started the year for the Las Vegas Raiders, a 2nd-round rookie, as somebody who was just like a blocking tight end, but that's picked up the past couple of weeks. Last week a little bit, this past week a lot. He plays 82% of the snaps, earns 6 targets, 5 catches, 75 yards. In deeper leagues, he is worth an add. And also in deeper leagues, I think you should be trying to add this next rookie receiver, and that's going to be Trey Palmer, who had 7 targets this past game, 2 catches, 47 yards. In a tough matchup, the Detroit Lions secondary is a borderline top 10 unit, and this was even with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin healthy. We've already seen Mike Evans deal with a hamstring injury this year. Trey Palmer, a 6th-round rookie, the fastest wide receiver at the NFL Combine, a ton of production during his time in college. This is somebody that you should stash, especially in deeper leagues. Now, a reminder to pick up Jaylen Warren, who is only available in 50% of leagues, somehow still available in 50% of leagues if you look at it the other way, because he's coming off of the bye week, and we saw him get dropped a lot as people just needed a bye week replacement, or maybe they just didn't like that he was going on bye and going to get a 0, and they'd rather have a better option on their bench to choose from. Jaylen Warren is a borderline running back 1 for his team, so go ahead and pick him up. And because of this right here, Ramondre Stevenson, he did return to this game, but he's dealing dealing with both a head injury. We're hoping that's not a concussion and that's why he returned. That'd be bad news for the NFL, but a head injury and an ankle injury, something to monitor because Ezekiel Elliott snaps have been increasing every single week of the season heading into this game. Ramondre's were decreasing every week. There's some speculation that Ramondre's playing banged up. Either way, Ezekiel Elliott, who's available in 50% of leagues, should be rostered. This is everything you need to know for your waiver wire heading into week 7. But the waiver wire is only one way to improve your team. The other way to do so is by trades, and when that video is out this week, it'll be right here for you. Now, before you go, if you made it to the end, there is no way you should be one of the 67% of people not subscribed to this YouTube channel. Do me a favor, it helps me out, but it allows you to see my future content. Hit that subscribe button.